Hey, this is Jason Johnson again at my YouTube channel. So if you're watching this on Instagram, it's only going to be about a minute. You want to jump over to my YouTube channel, Jason Johnson, Dr. Jason Johnson, to see the whole story. Thank you guys so much. The response to these YouTube videos has been great. Please like, subscribe, and share. Like I said, we're going to be dropping these a couple of times a week where I can get more in depth about things. Instagram is more like breaking news, and here on YouTube is where I get to go in depth on, as I usually say, 3 topics. Now, 3 topics for today. Since it's a weekend, it's a bit of a grab bag. There's a whole bunch of different stuff going on, but I have to talk about this. I've got to talk about this meme of black people resting, black people not protesting. Especially, you've probably seen this meme of black women sipping tea as the United States goes up into flames. So I'm going to talk about that today. And then I'm going to close it with my review of Sinners, because I saw Sinners, and there's a lot to talk about with that movie. So those are the 3 things today. So first off, I have to be clear about this. Number 1 on my 3 topics, why is this being covered? I always say that. Why what we consider to be news covers a particular issue is as if not more important than the issue itself. Number 2, why is this meme untrue and dangerous and why we need to be careful about it? And number 3, my thoughts on Sinners and how that actually relates to what we're seeing in the news right now. So here's the first thing. Why is it being covered? Why are you seeing articles in Axios and the Times and The Hill and people making random comments on the air that black women are resting, black women aren't participating, black people aren't protesting, blah, blah, blah. Why are we seeing that? Why are we seeing that kind of coverage, right? And this is important. This is what I do in my Morgan State classes about media literacy. You need to understand why the press does what it does. First off, you need to understand the people doing a lot of this coverage, and there's always a racial and a cultural and a class component to this. Mostly they are people who are not connected to the black community, period. They're not. They came to this story because of a viral meme. And so they see the meme and they assume, oh, well, I've seen this meme and I've seen other people sharing it. This must be true, right? And if it must be true, then I'm going to start asking black people that I know if this is true. And then they're going to say the same thing. Well, I've seen the meme, I guess it's true. It becomes a feedback loop, right? The other reason that we're seeing this covered is because in the wake of an authoritarian regime that's grabbing more power every single day, firing people, defying the Supreme Court, deporting people who are American citizens, and then mocking the senators who try to bring them back. While all these things are happening, you have large numbers of Americans who are worried, and black people are always the canary in the mine. Oh, why are black people out there protesting? Or we should see more of them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why this ends up being covered, right? The presumption is when bad things happen in America, white people and other groups of people should be able to see black people on the front lines complaining about the issue. And if they don't see that, there's a presumption that work isn't being done, and then you get this kind of coverage. Okay. Now, here's why I want to point out that this coverage is bad before we go to number 2, which is why this whole thing is dangerous and not true. So about a couple weeks ago, I went to the Bernie Sanders AOC rally, and it was like Gloria Park in Los Angeles, right? There were 36,000 people there, 36,000 people, right? And the Sanders AOC worldwide reunion tour has been doing pretty well. They go to Missoula, Montana. They get 9,000 people. They go to downtown Salt Lake City. It's done well. I think it's fine. I think it's reasonable to be in a permanent campaign mode if you're trying to galvanize people against an authoritarian regime. So all that stuff makes sense to me. I have no issue with what Sanders and AOC are doing. And apparently people are happy with me. Who's mad? It's not like they're necessarily going out there raising money. They're out there telling people, hey, fight against this regime, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to tell you my own personal experience, and this has to do with how these things are covered. So I go to the rally in downtown Los Angeles. Regular time during the day, traffic was kind of shut off one way or another. 36,000 people there. Now, I am not a living drone. I can't fly over everything. I can't tell you everything that I see. But I walked through that crowd throughout all of AOC's speech and throughout all of Bernie's speech. And just doing the eye test, I counted 17 black people. This is in Los Angeles. 17. Now, I am sure there were more than 17 people there. I'm sure there were more than 17 black people there. And California as a whole doesn't have a large African-American population. In LA, it's not the massive population that a lot of people think it is based on TV and movies. But when I tell you that I'm at a rally in downtown Los Angeles on a Saturday, and I count 17 people, and a number of the activists and organizers that I know, including people like Keith Boykin, who's in LA, or some of my former students who are Bernie fans, you didn't see a lot of African-Americans. And what I point out about that, and the reason I mention that is because that sort of thing isn't going to get covered, right? Because there's a way that the press covers Bernie Sanders and his movement and doesn't necessarily talk about the fact that in many ways that movement has never been particularly good at galvanizing black voters. And rather than having conversations about how maybe the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have disappointed black voters, and that's why you don't see a certain level of activism in a visual sense, no, that's not what gets covered. What gets covered is, where are the black people? Where are the black people? Because that's clickbait, and that's easy, and it's lazy, and that's what a lot of our political press does. Now, number two, why this is dangerous and why it's untrue. Because it's not true. Because I've said this before. Because if you actually know any activists, I don't know any real activists. If you're actually in community, if you're in group chats, if you actually know people who are doing this kind of work, they're still working. Just because it's not the kind of work that the political press in America considers to be work doesn't mean black people are not working. It does not mean that black people are sitting back passively watching cities burn. We can't sit back and watch cities burn because we're going to burn in those same cities, right? The reason that meme is so popular is not because it's necessarily reflecting public sentiment or will. The meme becomes popular because we have to understand that there's nothing organic online anymore. You know, Jack, when he used to run Twitter, he was basically an absentee landlord, right? Whatever's on Twitter is on Twitter. But you know that doesn't work with the current owner of Twitter. You know that doesn't work with the current owner of Instagram. They're going to amplify bad faith arguments that promote apathy and dissension, especially amongst people of color. That has been their plan all along. It's not new. It's not unique. So if you're looking on your algorithm and you're seeing all these different memes of black women saying, we're resting, we're not participating, of course that's what they want to amplify. But what they're not going to amplify is all the people who went out and did that work in Louisiana to push back on the bill. What they're not going to amplify is all the black people who went to work in San Francisco to get a new black mayor. What they're not going to amplify is all the black people doing work to protect HBCUs and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is under attack with all these Doge cuts. Black folks are working. They just may not be doing the work that the mainstream media wants to pay attention to. So we need to understand that that is a lie. It is a lie that's being promoted that is suggesting that black people aren't working in order to get other black folks to be apathetic, to say there's nothing going on here, to say that we're not involved. Don't let a meme dictate how you actually live your life. And by the way, I mention this because it's Easter Sunday and people are going to be talking about this. Boycotts and protests go hand in hand, right? I don't hear a lot about any other community that's been boycotting Target, but the African American community has been boycotting Target, and Target has been begging people to come in and try and get that fixed. So let's be clear that the work don't have to look like the work in the streets, that the work can be done in planning. The work can be done in shifts. The work can be done behind the scenes. The work is being done electorally. The work is being done by people recovering and preparing for the next and long-term battles. Just because you don't have a whole bunch of people standing out there during a hands-off rally, just because you don't see, I didn't see more than 17 black people at a Bernie Sanders rally. Again, I'm sure there were more. I'm just saying with my eyes walking around the crowd, I didn't see that many. Just because you don't see that, don't let the press, don't let the mainstream media fool you into thinking that something is going on in the African American community that's not going on. I don't know any real activists who decided they're going to quit just because a bunch of people made a bad decision and a bunch of people sat at home in the 2024 election. Now, I'm going to say this last thing really quick because I think it's super duper important. And I think because it actually applies to a lot of this. So I saw Sinners on Friday. Sinners was fantastic. It was probably the best time I've had in the movies in years. I don't know the last time I went to a movie and I was that excited. I went with a bunch of different friends. And there's an interesting thing I want to say about this movie. And it has to do with the same idea of coverage and community. So, Sinners is going to get about $45 million during the weekend. Great job on Ryan Coogler. I thought the performances were great. This Miles Catton kid, who was like one of the main characters, is great. Fantastic movie. Strongly suggested. I'll be honest, we finished seeing it and we saw it in a theater We saw that in a majority black theater where folks were talking and laughing, which is, hey, part of the community experience. We saw the theater, had a fantastic time. I could have left, got more snacks, and come back in and watch the movie back to back. It was that good. But here's what's interesting about Sinners, and what's interesting about how we talk about the press and what I've sort of been saying here. I have some friends and colleagues who are in the film industry who have criticism of Sinners. They have things that they didn't think were great about it. There were some plot issues that they saw. There are some production things that they saw, even if the movie is beautifully shot, incredibly detailed, and everything else like that. And what's interesting is we unfortunately lack a media ecosystem that we used to have even within the black community to do real coverage of a lot of issues. I can say a lot of different outlets that maybe even 5 years ago were much more prominent than they are now. I don't have to rattle them off. We all know what they are. But there were several of them that were rooted in the black community and told certain sorts of stories and that sort of thing, right? That are just not as prominent as they used to be. This is not a criticism of anybody, right? There are great writers out there. There's AREN Haynes at the 19th. There's Contraband Camp with Michael Harriot. There's black outlets. But I'd say 6 or 7 years ago, we used to have multiple outlets. And if you have multiple outlets, you have people who have unique voices. You might have had somebody out there who would write, I don't think Stacey Abrams should be the vice presidential pick. You have people out there who would have contrarian voices who say, hey, maybe Black Panther isn't as good a movie as everybody else thinks it is. And that was a healthy way for us to discuss issues. The problem that we're really facing now as a community is with the lack of organized news outlets, there's not a place for criticism the way there used to be. It's just viral videos and hot takes, and that ends up being a problem. That's the same thing I'm talking about with this overall coverage of black people. In the same way that you're not going to see any grounded, reasonable criticism of Sinners. I think it's an amazing movie, but there are people who have problems with it, but they don't have the space to make those kinds of arguments anymore, right? They got to go and tweet it or exit or thread it. In the same way that we don't have a lot of mainstream coverage of black people that makes any kind of sense, right? If you had more expanded political coverage, if you had more people, and this ain't just to having black folks, because trust me, not every black person is connected to organizing in activist communities, but if you had more journalists and reporters and analysts who were given enough airtime, given enough ink, given enough space in papers, you would have better analysis of what's actually going on. Instead, you have a bunch of people doing drive-by analysis and seeing what they see in Sinners and not understanding what the real people are actually doing. That's it for today. That's 3 things. Talk to you guys next week.